Welcome to my channel Limelight Leaks. Please share and subscribe and hit the bell icon for new updates. I couldn't be more grateful that they thought of me to come and do that, you know. But Vince Gill is a man known for keeping things nice, humble, loyal, and deeply respected in country music circles. But there's one hurt. Even time hasn't healed one. Artist broke Vince Gill's heart in a way no one saw coming. At first fans thought it was a fight, a betrayal, a bitter falling out behind closed doors. And Vince never publicly talked about it until recently. Who was this artist? What really happened between them? And why is Vince still shaken to this day? Let's figure out the mystery behind the one man Vince Gill couldn't forgive until it was too late. The perfect image. Vince Gill has always been country music's gentleman. Whether winning 22 Grammys or performing at memorials with tears in his eyes, he's never been one for drama. He's the guy who helps other artists shine even when he's the most talented one in the room, from the Grand Ole Opry stage to tear-filled funeral tributes. Vince has made a career out of being nice. No scandals, no backstage fights, no messy headlines. He's always stayed above the noise, choosing being humble over having a big ego in an industry full of egos and too much stuff. Vince became the rare kind of legend who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. He was everyone's favorite duet partner, the man you called when you wanted soul sincerity and a touch of heaven on the harmony. But there was another side to Vince. One most people never saw: his loyalty. When Vince loved someone, he stood by them. When he gave his trust, it was for life. That's why when cracks began to show, fans didn't just guess, they worried. So when fans started noticing a change, just a flicker, barely there, it felt strange. A quiet tension in his voice, a tribute performance where something felt missing, and in interviews a name that used to be spoken with warmth was suddenly absent. Vince had been hurt, and not by just anyone, by someone he once thought of as a brother, an unexpected friendship. It wasn't a collaboration born of PR or record labels. Vince and this artist connected long before camera flashes and awards. Back when Vince was still making his place in Nashville, Kristofferson had already been carved into the Mount Rushmore of country songwriters. He was the rebel poet, the Rhodes Scholar, who walked away from school to chase songs and storms. He wasn't just famous. He was feared and respected for the rawness of his words and the weight they carried, while others courted Nashville's industry machine. Chris broke the mold. He wrote songs that bled, lived like a man running from something unseen, and spoke with a preacher's strong belief about sin, salvation, and everything in between. To young artists, he was both scary and magnetic, so when their paths crossed backstage at a songwriter circle, no one expected them to become close, but they did. Vince didn't approach Chris as a fan. He approached him as a student. Their bond wasn't built on showbiz politeness. It was born over whiskey sipping nights and brutally honest talks about love, regret, God, and sadness. Chris talked like a man with 1,000 ghosts. Vince listened like a man who knew what it meant to lose quietly. They shared songs in progress, unfinished lines, and the kinds of silences that say more than words ever could. To Chris, Vince wasn't just another singer with a nice voice. He saw depth in him, a quiet honesty. So he took him in. And in return, Vince gave him respect. But the same man who inspired Vince would eventually leave him heartbroken. Something changed as years went by. Fans noticed Vince subtly staying away from Chris's legacy. No name drops, no collaborations. And at events where tributes were made, Vince either skipped the stage or spoke only in unclear terms. It didn't happen all at once. It was more like a slow fade. At first people thought it was scheduling conflicts, or maybe Vince just wanted to give other voices a chance. But over time the pattern became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just what he didn't say. It was how he said everything else. There was a holding back in his tone. When certain topics came up, a polite sidestep. Anytime someone mentioned the outlaw movement, a sudden shift in mood. When Chris's name floated into the conversation, when Chris was honored at the Country Music Hall of Fame anniversary gala, Vince was noticeably absent. When old friends posted tributes online, Vince remained silent. When asked about his early influences in interviews, he'd speak about Merle Haggard or Rodney Crowell, but somehow Chris never came up. Fans guessed, journalists theorized what had gone wrong. Some said it was creative differences, others pointed to belief divides, a few even hinted at something personal, something emotional. Rumors started swirling. Did Chris say something? Did they clash over politics, faith? A woman insiders whispered of a phone call that ended badly, one where Vince reportedly hung up and said, "I can't believe he said that to me." Was there a betrayal behind closed doors? Or was there something deeper? Vince wasn't ready to talk about the moment that shook him on stage in 2017 at a Nashville songwriters gathering. Vince was expected to share a song about one of his greatest influences. Fans expected a tribute to Merle Haggard, or maybe his late brother. The room was packed with fellow artists, songwriters, and longtime fans. It was a night of celebration, honoring those who'd paved the way in country music. Vince's name was listed near the end of the program. A spot, usually, saved for something powerful. Anticipation built. Cameras were ready. Some even whispered that he might debut a new tribute song. This wasn't just another gig. This was a legacy event. Every performer had brought something deeply personal. Songs written decades ago, memories soaked in heartbreak and triumph. The energy in the room was buzzing when Vince's name was called. People leaned forward in their chairs. Instead, Vince stepped up to the mic with a strange stillness in his body. He looked down, took a breath, and scanned the audience. "Sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who hurt you the worst," he said quietly. The room fell silent. Then he began singing. "Whenever you come around," his voice low and heavy. But midway through the second verse, he froze. His hand dropped from the guitar. His voice cracked. Then, without a word, he stepped away from the mic and walked off stage. He didn't explain he never finished the set, and whispers about Kristofferson grew louder. Vince's strange admission months later. In a radio interview, Vince was asked about songwriting mentors. It was meant to be a casual segment, lighthearted, nostalgic. The host was rattling off names, prompting Vince for stories, and Vince, as always, was gracious. He spoke warmly of Guy Clark's wit. He recalled Rodney Crowell's sharp pen and deeper heart. He even mentioned Jackson Browne and Emmylou Harris. Each name brought a smile or a story. Vince laughed a little, shared stories about writing in smoky hotel rooms and long nights on the road. His voice, always calm and measured, carried the weight of a man who had lived every lyric he'd ever sung. But as the list continued, something felt off. There was one name missing. A name that in previous interviews Vince would mention without hesitation. Kris Kristofferson, the host, sensing the missing name, leaned in with a gentle nudge. "What about Chris? I know he had a big impact on you for a moment." Vince just looked down the room, felt heavy. The silence dragged just long enough for listeners to notice. Then he spoke. "You can't always honor someone who stopped recognizing you." Cryptic, cold, devastating. Had Kristofferson betrayed him, forgotten him, or worse, abandoned him? Fans were left wondering, what could possibly break Vince Gill like that? A letter never answered, according to a close friend. Vince once sent a handwritten letter to Chris. No management, no middleman, just Vince bearing his heart. It wasn't about business. It wasn't about clearing the air for a tour or a public reunion. It was something far more personal. Vince poured out everything: gratitude, confusion, sadness. He wrote about the early days, the songs they once swapped, the late-night conversations that had shaped his soul. He even ended it with a line only Chris would recognize. An old lyric they once laughed over together. It was Vince's way of saying, "I'm still here, are you?" A quiet invitation to reconnect, one last olive branch from someone who rarely asked for anything. He didn't expect a grand gesture in return. Just a call, a note, a moment of clarity to confirm that their bond hadn't been completely erased. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, still nothing. No reply ever came, not even an acknowledgement. Vince told someone afterward, "That was my last try. Whatever we had, it's gone now." The man who wrote "Go Rest High on That Mountain" had always carried pain quietly, but this time something was different. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was permanent. The secret Vince couldn't say. In early 2025, Vince skipped an industry event honoring 1970s songwriters. His absence was obvious and intentional. It was the kind of event tailor-made for him. Legends were being celebrated. Stories were shared. Old friends reunited on stage for once-in-a-lifetime collaborations. Vince's name had been listed in the original program, and fans were expecting him to deliver a show-stopping tribute, maybe even something for Kris Kristofferson, who had long been rumored to be in declining health. Organizers were stunned when Vince pulled out just hours before showtime. No press release, no polite apology, just a quiet disappearance from the lineup. Some thought it was a scheduling conflict. Others suspected something deeper. Industry insiders whispered, had the rift grown that deep? But just a few days later, in a quiet chapel outside of Franklin, Tennessee, Vince reappeared. No big stage, no spotlight. Just a modest church crowd gathered for a midweek acoustic night. There was no fanfare, no formal set list. Just Vince, a stool, and an old guitar that had clearly seen some miles. Vince took the stage alone, visibly shaken. He clutched his guitar like it was the only thing holding him together. He played a new song, a haunting, unfinished ballad, and after the final note, he looked at the audience and said, "Just one word, Chris." There were no accusations, no bitterness. Only sadness, because the truth had finally come out. Kris Kristofferson had passed away, and that's what truly shattered Vince Gill. The grief beneath the silence. It wasn't betrayal. It wasn't a feud. It was watching a hero vanish for years. Those close to Kristofferson had known something was wrong at first. It was minor forgotten lyrics, missed appointments, confused faces in familiar places, but gradually the fog thickened. The man who had once painted the world with words was now struggling to recall his own lines. He began avoiding the stage. Interviews grew shorter. His answers, once poetic and profound, became vague, uncertain, and those closest to him were left to face an impossible truth. One of the greatest lyrical minds of his generation was quietly slipping away. Kris had always lived fiercely, like time didn't exist, but in the end, time caught up to him. Vince saw it happen up close. He didn't talk about it publicly, but friends say he watched in quiet agony as Kris's mind faded. They say the hardest moment came during a private backstage meeting when Kris looked Vince in the eye and smiled, but didn't recognize him. It was like being erased by someone you loved. It wasn't anger. Vince felt it was helplessness, grief, a slow, silent unraveling of a bond that had once meant everything. He kept it all inside, never lashing out, never placing blame, because he knew it wasn't betrayal. It wasn't a feud. It was watching a hero vanish. Kris Kristofferson had suffered memory loss for years. Slowly he forgot friends' lyrics, moments. Eventually he forgot Vince. And that was the real heartbreak. Vince wasn't angry. He was grieving someone who was still alive but no longer there. When Kris finally passed, Vince didn't release a statement because everything he wanted to say, he had already said in his silence. We often assume heartbreak comes from cruelty, scandal, or betrayal. But sometimes the deepest pain comes from love and loss. Vince Gill didn't lose a friend to a fight. He lost him to time. And that's why to this day there's one name Vince can't say without trembling. Kris Kristofferson. Let us know in the comments. What's your favorite song from these two icons, and which tribute hit you hardest? Like, subscribe, and join us for more real stories behind the legends, because sometimes silence is the loudest goodbye.